Here we go.
Can you hear me? So, if you can hear me, welcome to Block Valley. And of course, our topic today is about decentralized finance. So, it is for to bring for users that the legacy banking and finance system could not. All right, so I've prepared some questions about this, and it's very general, but of course, it's more important for us to actually touch the base general things about DeFi and blockchain because of course not many doesn't know about decentralized finance. Okay, so the first question, so let's start with from the top, Nathan. So what do you think are the pros and cons of decentralized finance?
Yeah, thank you, Michael. So the decentralized finance is solving what centralized finance is not able to do. So several of the pros are you will get a flash loan without any have to show any proofs, and you can stay as anonymous. So these are one of the pros. I'm not going to take much of the time. And the cons of DeFi has been there are several uncertainties at this point of time. As for example, when the institutions want to participate, there is no clear KYC and AML regulations happening at the moment. And also, there is a issue of insurance, which hasn't been solved at the moment. So these are the two things what I could see.
Very broad answer, to be honest. So we can definitely touch a lot of things when it comes to what you said, because of course, when it comes to regulations, it depends per country. And of course, as we all know, US is actually doing something about it. Thank you so much with your own opinion about this, the pros and cons. Let's go with Chris.
Hey, Myrtle, do we still use the same questions?
Yes, same question.
Yes. Okay. So, by the way, besides my startup, actually, I'm working for Sovico Group, which is one of the biggest group right now in Vietnam. They own a bank. They are Vietjet. If and any of you ever flight on Vietjet from Vietnam to anywhere, especially emerging country like Vietnam, if we select the right application for the banks or some of the very complex ecosystem from the decentralized point of view, it's going to benefit them a lot because, for example, in Vietnam, the payment system and cross bank transfer, for example, do not work for some certain banks during the weekends. So imagine if you have a payment infrastructure that allows people to send and receive money instantly, just based on the core feature of DeFi, that would benefit them amazingly. But the cons are also there as well, which basically the design of DeFi itself is a challenge, right? To onboarding people, to help them to move away from financial inclusion, and then now you give them a very complex system to play with, right? So that's have to depends on how these enterprise actually come up with a very easy to use system so that like can benefit from the DeFi offering, but at the same time try to simplify the system itself.
So, with what you said is actually the cons. Actually, that's the highlight that I got from your answer. So, when it comes to the simplicity of how people can understand DeFi, is the cons, right?
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Chris. How about Malcolm? I've known Malcolm ever since I got into the blockchain space. I've been with him as well with a physical event that actually Block Confex also organized in Bali. So we also met there. So what's your point of view about that?
Yeah, and Myrtle is a great singer. In case any of you want to hear her sing. Okay, so yeah, nice to be in the same event with you again, Myrtle. And one of the first DeFi projects that we did, she was actually also the AMA host, and she also got some of the tokens, I hope. Yeah.
I'm still
So
holding. Don't
Oh, okay,
worry.
good. Don't worry, it'll go up. Okay, so just a quick introduction about myself. I have written a book. I literally wrote a book on DeFi. Yeah, we published that in September 2020, and we have already done 4 DeFi projects since then. So I'm with the Technicorum Group. We are digital assets and cryptocurrencies specialists in all the verticals. And under this group, we have a company called Gravitas, which is our advisory group. And under Gravitas, we have done 4 projects for DeFi already. So essentially, there are many pros and cons. Some of the two speakers before me have already touched on some of these elements. Pros, of course, you disintermediate all the centralized authorities. So first of all, you save on costs. Secondly, like Chris mentioned, it's 24/7 and it's running all the time. So basically, it also allows access to the common people. Previously, a lot of financing options are not available to the common man, especially the unbanked and underbanked. And now, I mean, some of the countries that you represent, Philippines, Vietnam, there's so many unbanked and underbanked, and so many of them have crypto. And in fact, I just read a report on Vietnam, and they're the number one country
Yeah.
cryptocurrency. Right? Yeah, so
Number
very
three is the
interesting.
But
Philippines.
just
Oh,
to
really?
wait
Crazy.
for it, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, number one is Vietnam, number two is Nigeria, number three is Philippines. So, so the
Crazy.
southern hemisphere is starting to catch up to this game. Yeah. But
Yes.
basically, there are a lot of advantages offered by DeFi, and there are extraordinary profits available as well. Those who have been in DeFi from the start, DeFi started in 2017, and since early 2020, it has really exploded. You can see returns of over 100x per year, right? Previously, you would only see it in 2017, 2018, early 2018 in the crypto space, but now in DeFi, you can still see that kind of returns. So these are some of the big advantages. The disadvantages are also numerous. Again, the two speakers before me have already mentioned them. But some of the other elements, firstly, Myrtle is very right. The US SEC has already started to enforce on DeFi projects. So even if you have a DeFi project, please beware. If you're American, SEC will come and look for you anyway. They have already started a suit, and that Target actually paid a fine and admitted that they're guilt, right? So it is just because you're a DeFi project doesn't mean that the SEC or the CFTC is not going to go after you, right? They're still going to do that. And in DeFi, another problem is blacklisted addresses, because once you have a DeFi platform, it is very easy for the blacklisted addresses and the banned addresses to actually plug into the DeFi system and basically move all their coins there. And this infects the entire ecosystem. So there are already options available to blacklist and to stop these kinds of addresses from accessing your DeFi systems. And that's actually what we are doing actively, because we believe that DeFi in 5 years' time is still going to be around. It's going to be an essential part of the ecosystem. So it's better for us to already put up our hands and say, okay, we are going to abide by whatever we can to help with the AML CFT requirements. Another big problem that the two previous speakers didn't mention before is the rug pulls. So many rug pulls, right? And the typical DeFi project is a techie putting up a Discord channel and talking about the project, and you have no idea who they are. All right, I've met so many people on Discord channel, and I have no idea who they are, right? If something happens, they run off with your 20 million, 100 million worth of funds. Nobody knows who to go after. So we see that repeatedly, but then a lot of people are still driven by greed and still want to get in the projects. And then you don't be surprised when there's a rug pull. They will say, "Oh, someone stole the money, a hacker got the money, or something." There are so many excuses, but basically, poof, all the money went, right? So I think that's one of the biggest problems. We have no idea what are the real projects and which are the ones that are just rug pulls and scams waiting to happen. So those, I think, are some of the critical errors, issues with the DeFi space.
Wow. So that's really big because, to be honest, I just want to share to all of you because here, Axie Infinity is the one who's really booming right now. To be honest, I own my own three teams as well. So now the government wants to have a tax for all of the players, to be honest. So my question is actually how. So that's the best part there, right? So when it comes to the government collaborating and mixing with DeFi and games, it's actually going somewhere. So of course, we need to abide with the rules and regulations with our governments. And also for the rug pull, I've also experienced that. I already lost like $1,000 because of that. So I completely understand what you meant. So when it comes to the anonymity of each people per project, so of course it's a risk It's a big risk for the investors. It's a big risk for the small ones as well. So it's very important for us to make the due diligence, though it's very overused already. Do your own research in this space. But of course, we need to be very careful. So I want to ask Phil about his opinion.
Well, I think a lot has been covered. A little bit of an intro. My name is Phil Gomes, and I'm the Chief Marketing and Communications Officer of Vesper Finance. And a lot of what I'm hearing is kind of skates to where a lot of the reasons why we started Vesper in the first place, right? I mean, so in terms of the pros of DeFi, it's it is, I argue, a very powerful thing when you have the business logic of finance there plainly visible on Etherscan. Whereas I think a lot of what we see in the shared surface area between conventional finance and government is such a black box, right? It's tough to know what's going on inside. So it's interesting because to a lot of people who say, well, I don't understand DeFi, my response is you probably don't understand your bank very well either. And at least, even if you aren't a super coder, at least the rules are knowable, which is, I think, very powerful. So I would say that in addition to a lot of the insights that some of the previous panelists have said, in terms of being always on, et cetera, et cetera. Now about the cons. I think we all agree it's still difficult to use. When we started Vesper Finance, we wanted the experience of participating in DeFi yield to be as easy as 2 to 3 steps, and one of those steps is show up to a website. And I think that's a lot of the reason why we started Vesper and why we do what we do. Malcolm brought up the notion of rug pulls, right? So crypto in general, DeFi in particular, we're dealing with a certain amount of, I guess you could call, reputational baggage. But I think the promise of increased and more focused regulation most certainly isn't a guarantee against it. We have rug pulls in conventional finance, as anybody who saw the movie The Big Short, could probably attest. But nevertheless, I mean, I do think that there is a lot of work to be done globally in terms of, again, that shared surface area between what we're doing and inevitably what the government is how the government is viewing all this. I will say though that the tendency for governments, I can speak for the United States, so much of our securities law was written in the 1930s to restrain captains of industry, titans of industry, like the Rockefeller family and the J.P. Morgan family and that sort of thing. And we're taking these ancient tools of concrete and steel and trying to apply them to the world of DeFi. And I think that is another challenge too, is that there's a tendency to take newer technologies, newer thinking, and apply these you take the law book off the shelf and blow the dust off of it and then try to create a sensible regulatory regime. I think we will, as an industry, still continue to encounter it, but we can also demonstrate that ultimately we have a better way. So
Thank you so much. Actually, that's a really broad rather than other topics, because of course, the U.S. regulations is very different amongst any other countries, right? Because here in the Philippines, there's a lot. Just to share again that we're regulating exchanges already to be operational here. So we have 20 million users already here in the Philippines out of 100 million in the population. So it really depends on each regulations that we're going to touch when it comes to the consequences as well. Thank you so much, Phil. So for David, what's your point of view about this one?
Well, thanks. The nice thing about going last is that everyone takes all the great ideas and you have to pick from the bottom of the barrel. I'm just kidding. So, first, to introduce myself, I'm David Wyly, the useless executive officer for Useless Crypto LLC, here registered in the United States in our tough legislative environment. So, yeah, to answer your question, so pros and cons. This is again a very broad topic, but I think both a pro and a con is the unregulated nature of everything. So, for example, like for the fact that it's unregulated is, I think, a good thing right now, in that the lack of regulation helps, I think, drive innovation. And regulation is one of those things where it's cat and mouse, right? You're going to have people that come in way after the fact in regulation as we innovate faster than they can regulate sometimes. So it's an unstoppable force, which is one of the things I love about DeFi, and I think a lot of people fear about DeFi. So there's a lot of freedom in it. I think in terms of pros, right, you're getting away from banks, you're cutting out the middleman, you are allowing for transfers to go instantaneously to anybody, anyone, to anywhere in the world. It's amazing. And you have the flexibility of these smart contracts where you can innovate literally in a day. You can come up with something that has never been done or tried before. You can launch it and get it rolling literally in a matter of hours. And you can, so for example, in one of the projects that I worked on, in 72 hours, 10,000 holders. It was amazing, right? From just a little side project you put together, and off it goes. And it becomes an immovable, unstoppable force. And so that's the cool thing, I think, about DeFi, is that as much as regulation, I think, will chase after it, sometimes regulation in the space can sometimes be a good thing, where it helps avoid, I think, a lot of the problems that are sometimes associated with DeFi, such as rug pulls, scams, or exchanges that are lying about their volume, or are playing games with arbitrage and locking people out of being able to like do things on their own exchange and with their own money. So there's areas of regulation that can help the space, but there's also areas where obviously we need to be and maintain a lack of regulation. And so just based off how quickly I think this space moves, I think regulation will always just be trying to catch up. To go over on some of the cons, and I think address some of those concerns, is obviously, as it was mentioned before, rug pulls, scams, anonymity, lack of regulation in the space, that kind of thing. It's really easy to copy smart contracts. It's really sometimes hard to innovate in the space. And so here at Useless Crypto, that's one of the things that we really care about, is innovating in the space of DeFi. And so in trying to do things like, create a swapper contract where you send BNB to it and then it automatically sends you tokens back, right? That's one of the areas that we've pushed forward in innovation. Other things like liquidity pool and auto stabilization of liquidity, these are things we're trying to innovate in. Or on tax tokens, where you're trying to do bypass mechanisms for taxation, these are areas we're trying to innovate. And so when it comes to scams, rug pulls, things like that, it's a constant topic. But again, it's a cat and mouse. There's areas that we can innovate to solve these problems in DeFi. For example, if you have an issue with scams and rug pulls, you can create a launching platform that will then allow for you to launch tokens and lock liquidity and do all these things, where people fall victims to scams, and then people build a better way to help avoid these scams, right? And again, it's back and forth. It's almost a week in crypto feels like a month, I think, in real. It's crazy how fast this whole space moves. And that's one of the things I love about it. So again, that was a lot of content, pros and cons. I could go into it for hours and hours, but I want to leave some time for other questions.
Yeah, because it's very important for us to tackle, especially those who doesn't know about DeFi, the pros and cons. What are they getting into? To be honest, so a lot of people ask me, how can I buy Axis? So, of course, it's a very tedious way if they don't know about blockchain. So, that's my own perspective when it comes to teaching as well as providing mass adoption. How can they understand it in a simple way?
Right.
So yeah, and actually, who wants to answer this question? Because if we're going to do this, we're gonna not gonna finish everything. So what do you think that DeFi can replace our traditional system? So if anyone wants to answer about that.
I would like to answer.
Sure.
So sitting here in the crypto valley in Switzerland, so which is very well known for the traditional banking industry and especially the private banking. So probably I have some exposure, if I could say that one. Here, what happened in the traditional banking industry? So most of the people, they were used to the old game, which is completely saturated at the moment. When we say like the DeFi will replace the traditional finance, you can see the numbers, right? So the people who have been very influential bankers here in Switzerland who are managing hundreds of billions of dollars or even $1.5 trillion are joining us. So at Rubik's, we also hired a couple of people who have managed $100 billion plus. So these are the people who have been very well respected in the industry and they do believe in the future, what's happening. So when we say replacement, when you look into the actual numbers of the finance, DeFi is roughly around $100 billion, but the traditional finance is like trillions of dollars, like 15 trillion plus. It is a very, very small fraction amount of money at the moment. But the actual money at this point of time, whether we like it or not, will belong to the institutions, not with the people. So that is the fact. Are we going to attract their interest? Yes, we do have their attention at the moment. And they are trying to understand, as rightly mentioned by other panelists and Martel, access to DeFi has been inaccessible not only for the people, also for the institutions. They are unable to understand. When I tell them, okay, this is the address, you can just send the money, put in $100 million, you shall be able to stake it. And they say, okay, what is the paperwork? Where should I sign? Okay, should I bring my passport? Okay, well, what about the paperwork, like 200 papers I'm going to sign? These are the questions which are asked not by the normal people. These are the professional institutions, banks, and the people who really have money. So, for example, a high net worth individual with a disposable income of $10 billion wants to push 10% of his holding into the Swiss banking as a DeFi. There are some DeFi projects available. So they don't do take their own decisions. What they do, they will assign a manager who is very well taken care for their family for the past 20 years, for example, a banker. So that particular banker will come and meet me in office and say, okay, so what can we do? What is the thing it has to be taken? So we have their attention now. Rug pulls and other problems, yes, this is the learning, what we have seen. There is an evolution which is happening. But as we see at Rubik's, what we are innovating, couple of things, right, to solve the existing problem. So DeFi was there to solve the centralized finance, but DeFi has its own legacy of problems. For example, high gas fee, and rug pulls is another problem for sure, and also replica tokens which are coming, right? So that the tickers, if it's a Bitcoin, so it can be BTC, which is a very well known. In a decentralized exchange, it can you can list as a BTC, where people are putting into that particular scandal also. So there are some concerns where we are doing it using something called asynchronous parallelism and digital identity, which is linked to the wallet. These are the innovations we are doing to make sure we are addressing the problems which cannot go through. So as we speak, to straight answer your question, yes, there is a very high possibility, if not replacing the whole centralized finance, at least to take a significant portion, maybe 10 to 20% of the traditional finance in the next 5 to 6 years down the line.
I completely agree with that because of course just to mention how it works because I'm talking about experiences as well. So just imagine like 18 years old who doesn't have a bank knows how to DeFi, how to use it, how to use Uniswap. So actually the world is changing now, especially the voices of the people, the generation, the millennials is what we call it here. So they have really the power to take over everything, to understand everything when it comes to this one. Especially now, it's just like it's a big responsibility that we've entered the space like 2015, 2017. How can we explain it better to the people who actually have that traditional mindset, right? The traditional ways that they're used to. Who wants to answer about additional information about that?
Well, I mean, you would ask the question, do we think DeFi can replace traditional or conventional finance? And I think about again, how do people regard their bank? If you ask 90% of any audience, what do you think a bank does? They're going to say, well, they hold my money. That's pretty much what they're going to tell you. Most people see banks as that. What they probably don't know is that, for every unit of currency you deposit, they're going to take that unit and loan it out, what, 5, 10 times, right? Um, and that's supposed to be the way things go. And so Bitcoin solved that, didn't it? Bitcoin solved the notion of, okay, this notion of just holding and moving money, we can do that in a decentralized way. Okay. And now it's like, okay, here comes DeFi. Um, Now more and more of the value added activities that a bank can do are getting absorbed into the protocol layer. And I think that is really exciting way to think about it. And so if you look at, you know, highly optimistically how this looks like in 5, 10 years, whatever, it's, when all of that financial, what is today financial value add, is swallowed into the protocol, then what do financial institutions do, right? Maybe their job becomes to master these protocols better than anybody else. Maybe they become kind of a customer service layer, right, that sits on top of that complexity. And I think it's very exciting to think about, because again, this notion of, you know, if finance became just as part of the plumbing as, the video codec protocol that allows us to talk to one another across several countries, it's really exciting to think about. I don't think that conventional finance doesn't have a role, but I think the boundaries of where that value add, you know, takes place, could shift dramatically.
I completely agree with that as well. Especially now because it's just like the partition between the traditional banking system, the traditional people. There's certain ages as well if we're going to think of it. So again, the 40s, the 20s, it's really different when it comes to understanding everything, especially with the economy. So, to the next question that I have, I actually want Chris and Malcolm to answer this, and the last question will be David. So everyone can definitely answer, of course. So this question is, what are the ways that you can think that decentralized finance can help our economy? For Chris and Malcolm, and then the question later, the last question is, it's easy to talk about blockchain and DeFi. This is for David. So for those who knows it already, how can this lead to mass adoption? And of course, how can people have peace of mind and of course security for their assets?
All right, I go first, Malcolm. So basically, I think it's important to basically build up a simple uh, application for for it. For example, right now I think in Vietnam one of the um, challenge in the market, which is cash handling, cost for the banks and even for the smaller merchants, especially during this difficult time, like COVID, which you can't really go out under the lockdown, for example. So a good example would be something similar to CDBC stablecoin, but more like a more internal, system, stable points or coins where people can trade and use that to make payments and stuff. But you are basically, if you do that, you're walking away from depending on a like a middle layers, like the approval and processor, like in the traditional banks, for example. And it's gonna really help, like markets like Vietnam to, facilitate the trade faster and easier for these merchants to, get money or even pay off their whatever the business, right? I think it's really go down to the application layers and yeah, that's my input.
Right. To pick up from there, the short answer to that is make it cheaper for the cost of finance, right? So that's obviously one big factor that can help the economy. Secondly, it can allow money or value to spin much faster. So when you have everything digital, just like in COVID, and like Chris mentioned earlier, um, it's a lot of enforced stay-at-home activity, right? So digitization has gone shot up the roof. Adoption of technology has shot up the roof. Games have done very well. Movies have done very well. Online content has done very well, right? But anything that is in the traditional markets has been doing very badly. So this is something that DeFi can certainly assist the economy with, because it allows the spending economy to be on a digital platform, and it makes the world smaller. Basically, like how we are right now. 2 years ago, Myrtle, we were in Bali, and we all had to be there. But now, almost every event is done through a webinar. Everyone could dial in from all over the world, and we can all participate at the same time. So it's the same thing with decentralized finance. um, how I do most of my transactions now is really through wallets, right? We still use the banks because the fiat amounts need to be transferred, but bank transfers are typically T+2, whereas in DeFi, in crypto in general, it's usually a matter of seconds or a matter of minutes, right? If it's 1 hour, people are already complaining. So this is the reduction of barriers, is breaking down of the barriers. How I often describe cryptocurrency and blockchain to people is internet enabled information transfer, and blockchain enables asset transfer. So with decentralized finance coming in as one of the core ways that finance is going to be handled in the future, it will democratize finance even more through the use of technology. So if things can be digital, then everything can be facilitated, it can be expedited, it can be much faster, much cheaper. Yeah. So these are some of the advantages to the economies.
Yes, to actually add up with that before you answering my question, David, because DeFi is really rewarding compared to other traditional banks, based on my experience. It's just like this, what do you call this, the locked period when it comes to investments. I'm not a financial advisor, I'm just stating my experience. But of course, when it comes to the miscellaneous fees, when it comes to the generation after some years for DeFi, it's really rewarding, especially with King Swap as well.
Thanks.
By
I,
the way,
I'm reminded by one of our employees. So she was an executive director of one of our companies, and she was asking, what kind of returns can we get? So we told her 6. So she said, what, 6% per annum? That's very good. No, they said, no, nowadays people want 6% per day. So that if you tell a traditional finance guy, they will say this is a scam, right? But in DeFi,
yeah, even in Goku Market, we do have like 250% because of the automated trading. So of course they'll think it's a scam because no one knows about AI, or eToro has that as well. So they're automated trading like copy trading. So of course it's our responsibility to provide the right information and education. So going to David, the last presenter and panelist, to answer the last question.
Okay. So just to repeat the question for those in the audience who are listening and for my own benefit, the question was, it's easy to talk about blockchain and DeFi for those who already know it already, but how can this lead to mass adoption for people's peace of mind and security for their assets? So it's interesting. I feel that it's almost like how our grandparents, when the internet came around, they struggled, right? They didn't know how to set up a printer, they didn't know how to set up a computer, they didn't know how to use the internet, they didn't know how to use phones, right? This is all very scary to them. I feel like DeFi, the accessibility of it, right, for mass adoption, it's going to be one of those things. I think that a generation lower than that is going to be scratching their heads at and trying to figure out, well, Generation Z, millennials are probably going to be moving fast ahead. One interesting tidbit from the community in Useless is that they one of our community members tipped their waitress in Useless and walked them through the process on how to actually, get Trust Wallet up and running, and scan the QR code and then tipped it, and then good luck actually being able to sell it. It's going to take you a little bit of time to figure out how to get BNB to that wallet and for the gas, and get it sold. But it's a start in educating and training these people. I think is the number one thing in order to help lead to mass adoption, is how does this stuff actually work. Another thing too is, if you think about it in terms of how software progressed, right? It's like we're in the DOS days right now. I mean, we're putting in like floppies into our computer, right? We're loading programs in and we're working at the command line. And, people look at this are like, oh my gosh, look at these wizards, right? And eventually what happens with mainstream adoption is you get abstraction layers and abstraction layers to make these steps more and more simple. So what was originally something we'd have to program stuff yourself, then people start building applications that allow you to do stuff on the CLI more quickly and more easily. Then you had something like WordPerfect as an application in DOS, which built out something like a graphical user interface. Then you have something like Windows, right, that originally came out and blew people's minds on how you can abstract away all that CLI stuff. And then finally you have like the browser and all these other advanced applications. And so abstractions upon abstractions upon abstractions, I think, is how we're going to lead to mass adoption in this space, and finding building tools to make this whole process easier. Because right now it's just a complicated web of, you know, um, it was really interesting trying to get some of my software engineer friends into DeFi. It took them 2 hours to like purchase SafeMoon. It was crazy. So it was like, hey, you have to go to Binance and you have to do all the know your customer stuff, and then you have to move the money in. Then you got to wait 10 days in US, go you. And then you got to, US doesn't support BEP20, so you have BEP2, so you have to send it over to Trust Wallet. Then you have to transfer your BNB over to Smart Chain BEP20. Then you can go to Pancake Swap, which is a D app. Then you have to swap for Useless, right? And then you have to make sure you have to have the gas and it's very complicated. And so there's a lot of things that at Useless that we're trying to do to ease this process. Is that we are building an app that's like the Robinhood of crypto. And for those of you not in the know, Robinhood, at least in the US, is help really break down the barriers to stock, for people trading stocks, right? And so we're trying to do the same thing with crypto. Easy to use charts, simple, easy to use type philosophy across the board. It's going to take a while, I think, to fully get there and to build all those abstraction layers. But these are the things that we need to work on. These are the things that we need to do in the space of DeFi, is to really think about how people are going to get into this. We're all going to benefit if we can build tools and resources to lead to this mass adoption. And then finally, just for the last piece, regarding peace of mind and security for their assets and things like that. I think locked LP, multi-sig contracts, registered entities, docs board of directors, actually, all these things are security measures to bring people some peace of mind. I think that's just incredibly important that we not only just work on the software and the tooling, but how we actually present these projects to the mind. Right? I'm fully doxed. I have a corporate entity. I have a multi-signature wallet that owns the contract. And these are things that are going to help lead to mass adoption if we step in front of this and say these are things that we have to do as a community to bring and instill trust into this whole process.
Powerful messages, everyone, and thank you so much. I didn't know that it's actually just a few minutes that we have. That's why I prepared five. So I'm sorry for that, but don't worry. At least we've covered all of the questions. Like, we've rolled everything out. Thank you so much, and I hope that I can actually be with you again in another session. But the time is up. So thank you so much, guys. I
Thank
hope we
you.
can see each other one day in a physical event again. Please stay safe and healthy.
Thanks. Bye bye.
Yeah, you
You
Thank
too.
too.
you.
Thanks a
Bye
lot.
Bye bye.
bye.
All right. Hello there. I am David Wyly. I'm the Useless Executive Officer of Useless Crypto, and it's a pleasure to be here to give a keynote speech. So I have some prepared remarks that should last about 5 minutes or so. And then I'll go into a little bit more in depth on what Useless Crypto is and how we're actually trying to innovate the space of DeFi. So part of what we talked about in one of the discussion panels earlier is the question, what does decentralized finance bring for users that the legacy banking and finance system could not do? So there we go. So starters, it's community. Each DeFi token has such a unique community behind it, and it really reflects the collective average of its sense of humor, its intelligence.
Sorry, guys.
And the Useless community prides itself uniquely on being very transparent about everything going on with the contract's workings and the token. I can't count how many times I've heard people say that their bank lied to them. And while I can't speak for a lot of the crypto space, I can tell you at Useless, being as transparent as glass is our goal. And the community feels the inclusion because of it. Being a member of one of, say, for example, JP Morgan's institution doesn't provide any sense of belonging beyond having maybe the same looking debit card as everyone else. It just feels like an impersonal system you sign up for that doesn't care about what ultimately happens to you. And nobody is making memes about how awesome their bank is and sharing it all over social media. So you can't be up in the middle of the night excitedly communicating with your friend halfway around the world about the bank you use. So Useless is proud to have holders and leadership from all over the world working together and trying to educate the DeFi space so that not only learn about crypto in the DeFi space, but also enjoy the experience with personal interactions with the community. Crypto carries an emotion with it, I'd say, that I imagine is very similar to, heading out west or leaving Europe to immigrate to America. There's risk, but the largest sentiment is hope, potential for freedom of a better life and breaking away from systems that have previously failed us, like banks. So the sentiment for banks, it's mostly negative, particularly after 2008, combined with the hassles of a system
David,
that,
sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
Can you share your screen?
I'm currently just giving a speech, and then I'll share my screen, so I can do that. Let me see. Hope this is the right one because I have two open. 1 second. Sure. That's the wrong one.
Perfect.
That's my notes. Hold on. Maybe it's this one. Haha, there it is. All right, so back to this. But anyway, yeah, the sentiment for banks is mostly negative, particularly after 2008. So combined with the hassles of a system that hasn't innovated new products for their institutions since the invention of the ATM, it's starting to feel like using a fax machine when you could just send an email, right? So the concept of a bank was so forced, like subscribing to an internet service in America. Companies have a monopoly, and it's actually half a dozen of one or six of the other. Everything at its core is usually the same bad experience, right? So because of this, using a bank also feels very oppressive, as though your ideas for innovation or willingness to immerse yourself in the future is completely stifled. So the banking system is predicated by the boomer generation because they have all the most money in the banks statistically. But catering to their generation and that refusal to change and innovate is keeping banks in a stagnation while its younger users are banding it faster, more economically efficient ideas that also have the potential to accrue far better value than any yield in a regular savings account. So in DeFi, there's this immense potential to innovate how your tokens are put to use and how to choose to keep them in places of your interest. Banks continue to invest your money in ETFs or, quite frankly, wherever they want, regardless of your vote. And only recently added Bitcoin to their list of ways they take your money and invest it. So with DeFi, you can find these amazing products, physical or digital, NFTs, charities, networks. The possibilities for blockchain is really endless. And so is the ability to choose how you want your tokens to help towards that innovation and that industry. So Useless is working on making the charting space and the crypto education space way more user friendly with our app. So despite their shortcomings, Robinhood changed the game with their incredibly user friendly stock app. And Useless's app feels very similar, intuitive to use. It includes other fun and cool features like our tokens utility. So people aren't just using our app, they're easily included in our tokens community as well. And so anyway, these are the prepared remarks I've had. And so I'm going to dig in a little bit more into what Useless is. So the next thing in here, besides just community, right, is talking more about the innovation. Um, so I'll be going over a few points here where we are innovating in this space. One is financial access. Two is being transparent. Three is educating the space, and four is really how we survive things like crypto winters. So first, you're probably asking yourself, what is useless? I mean, your name is useless. I mean, that's probably the first thing I should address, right? So the only useless thing about us is the name. We started out as a meme coin, but it took a much serious turn very quickly when we had some really innovative ideas, and we decided that we were going to put a little bit more serious undertone to the originally what was meme and originally what was humor, now towards more building systems and helping to innovate the space of DeFi. So Useless is a brand, right? It's a company. Useless Crypto LLC is registered in the state of Utah. Useless is a mobile app ecosystem. So a charting app, a whale watching app, portfolio management, listings for tokens. Useless is a suite of D apps and smart contracts, decentralized apps and smart contracts. So we have things like a swapper contract for you to be able to send BNB to and get tokens yeeted back into your wallet. Arbitrage helpers, bypass taxation tokenomics, bypass DApps, things like that. And finally, Useless is a token with utility. So in our app, Useless is spent by token communities for listing and ranking their token, and Useless is spent by users for unlocking premium app features. Let's move on to the next one. So our beginnings it's really interesting. We originally launched, like I said, as a meme, but we've grown much more than that. Original developer handed the keys over to the community. I wasn't really quite interested in running the token. I was actually one of the first few investors, and decided that I was going to really try to help as a member of the community to try to take Useless to the next level. And so, because of those efforts, we ended up being really a community-led project. And after the original dev left, handed over all the keys, all the socials, everything, that's when we met our first real challenge, which was a liquidity issue found in the contract. So what we did is, instead of just feeling sorry for ourselves, we rolled up our sleeves and we relaunched the token in mid-June. And since then, it's just been an incredible journey. We found a lot of really, really, really cool people who have looked at us, see what we're doing, and helped join the ranks of this community-led project. So we've just from the fruits of this, we have more than 25 people from around the world actively involved in this project. Things like product management, project management, graphic design, mobile app development, both front end and back end, smart contract development, DApp development, marketing, community management, grow marketing, business development. The list goes on, right? All these people are putting an incredible amount of work into helping to make this project successful. And the community itself, incredible support from the community. We've already raised $25,000 for listing on Probit. They're a little slow, but we'll get there eventually. Heavy involvement from our whales as well. The vast majority of our whales actively support this project. Donations for marketing are through the roof, and even things like physical coins being minted and auctioned off, which is actually going to happen next Sunday. And all the help for beta testing the app, which we currently have as an open beta right now. You can pull it up on your phone and play with it right now. This isn't vaporware. This isn't us promising anything. We're already in an open beta at this point in time. So our mission and goals are to help innovate the space of DeFi. And how do we do that? It's through smart contracts that solve real problems like fluctuating liquidity or too much taxation with arbitrage, like price islands, the prevalence of scams and rug pulls. We also want to help increase the accessibility of DeFi. And how do we do that? Is easy, simple to use apps. We again, Robinhood of crypto, make it easier for people to get into crypto, starting with zero knowledge. So a couple of key differences from what you might see from a traditional buyback system. We have something that we coined recycled buybacks versus what we call injected buybacks. So I'm not going to name any names because in DeFi, we want to be very friendly and not pick on other tokens. But say, for example, that you have a token that, say, as the price increases, it does little sells. And then if there's like a big dip, then what it will do is it will pull all that BNB and then put it back in. So it just jumps back up, right? And that's something that we call recycled liquidity. You're basically robbing Peter to pay Paul, right? If you had a debit card that charged you 6% and put it in a savings account for all the money you spent, and then at the end of the month when you're poor and scraping for food, then the money comes out of that account into your checking account and you're like, hooray. Is that actually you like earning money, or is that just moving money around, right? And so that's a difference between the useless ecosystem for buybacks versus others. So what we do is we take revenue from our apps, from our DApps. We take that BNB and we inject it directly back into the token, either as liquidity or as actual direct buyback, which helps the price action. One of the things that we're really proud of, this is our ecosystem that we're building out. We don't want to be just a traditional token. What we really want to do is innovate in the space. And this is just an example. I could talk about this all day, this chart right here. But really what this is how we are trying to reason through the macro level. So there's a couple of key innovations that we're doing compared to other tokens that are taxed. For example, on all of our exchanges, we are not having off-chain tokenomics or off-chain taxation. So you may have some tokens who pride themselves on the fact that on Bitmart or Hotbit or whatever, right, that they have like a 5 or 10% tax. We frown upon that because what happens is that creates price islands. This arbitrage between exchanges needs to happen. So if you have a 30% price differential between another exchange, that's a problem, right? And so what we're trying to do is we're actually trying to facilitate arbitrage. And so we've innovated a couple key things. One is that we have a bypass distributed app, decentralized app. And what that will do is instead of paying the full 8% tax for useless, you pay a 2% BNB surcharge. And that BNB that is collected from that goes to something we call our furnace, which intelligently injects that BNB into the token. We also have an arbitrage DApp. What that does is that allows you to purchase off PancakeSwap and move it over to your exchange deposit wallet in one transaction. And so what that does is, again, reduce the taxation that occurs in this entire process. It's only 8%, which is the entire. So for the price of purchasing off PancakeSwap, the exact same price, you'd be able to move it over into an exchange, which is pretty cool. And finally, a swapper contract, which we innovated. What's really cool about these swapper contracts is you send it BNB and it brings tokens back into your wallet directly. And this is something that we're calling side tokenomics, where we're taking these BNB surcharges and we're applying a different set of taxation benefits from it. We're taking that revenue and we're putting it into a furnace. And that, again, injects it directly back into the token. This is an example of our flow chart of how we take things from our arbitrage contract, our swapper contract, the bypass contract, how we generate BNB and tokens from these contracts. We inject them into the furnace, and then the furnace will then look at the state of liquidity and make a decision on how to handle that. So it leads to what we call the first LP stable token. Really cool stuff, because liquidity sometimes is all over the place when you're dealing with tokens of this size. If liquidity can get too low, right? It can get below 5 or 3%, and your price action starts becoming really volatile. You could have too much liquidity where your price action stagnates, and it's really hard to get out of a rut. During periods of intense purchasing, your liquidity will drain quickly, and it creates more volatility. If you have a lot of a huge sell-off, then your liquidity will just shoot through the roof, and it will almost appear like your price gets stuck. And so having too much liquidity, too little liquidity, these are problems that vex tokens. And what we've built is a system that will evaluate the health of the liquidity pool and either inject liquidity if the liquidity is too low, and if the liquidity is too high, then it aggressively buybacks and burns, which reduces the liquidity drastically. And we want that to equalize anywhere between 10 to 15%. This is an example here of our flow chart for, whether we have too little liquidity, do we have tokens to pair in the furnace, then this is the operation that we evaluate and then do. So either we are directly injecting liquidity, or we are doing an LP stable buyback, right? This is something we call reverse swap and liquify, which is really kind of cool. What it does is it takes half of it takes the full amount of BNB in the furnace, it splits it in half, takes half of that, purchases tokens, brings the tokens back, takes the BNB and the tokens, the purchase tokens, and injects into liquidity. And that's really, really cool because it injects liquidity in a way that doesn't it's LP stable, doesn't drain your liquidity like you would expect normally. And then finally, buyback and burn. That's the most fun when you're talking about price action. So if you have really healthy liquidity or too much liquidity, then we can even exhaust liquidity from LP tokens in the furnace contract. That's not even here in this chart here. But we can aggressively buy back purchase tokens and then burn them from the BNB in the furnace, which is pretty cool. So the app itself, let's go into that a little bit more. I'll give you actually a preview of what that looks like. So as you can see here, the app is really, it's listing your favorite. It's basically a listing app that then allows you to drill in and see charting action and transactions as they happen. So how does it play a role in the company and crypto DeFi space? What makes it unique, right? What are our future plans? So our current features is you can easily find featured listings. You can have a simple line chart as well as the option for candlesticks. You can view the coin or token details, socials, websites, so on and so forth. You can see past and real-time transactions. You can whale watch the top 50 whales. You can even drill into the chart of whale holdings and see the chart action over time, which is pretty cool. You can search for tokens by name, contract address. You can choose which network you want to use, whether it's Ethereum, Binance Smart Chain, so on and so forth. And you can favorite what you're following so it pops up to the top of the list. So some of the planned futures that we have are things like that I'm excited for, but they're going to be coming into the future after we get our MVP really solid. Is asset portfolio overview of all your holdings with a chart tracking all your assets over time. Also, we are very interested in collaboration partnerships with auditing firms to more accurately assess risk. So the question, how does it play a role in the company and crypto DeFi space? Well, it's designed for simplicity in mind. It's catered towards making crypto accessible to newcomers to the space, it's pivotal that we have less resistance into this space. You talk to your brother or your sister or your mom or your dad about investing in a new Binance token, their eyes are gonna glaze over, right? And so the purpose of this app is, like I mentioned in one of the previous panels, is that this is part of the abstraction, right, of making crypto easier for people, getting them into this environment. We're still really young, we're still really early. Some people call it the Wild West, right? And the more easily that we can invite people into this space, put an app in front of them that allows for them to intuitively understand what's going on and to navigate their way around, then that helps the world of DeFi. And that's what we're trying to do. That's just another render of what the useless app looks like from the charting side. So providing financial assistance, the crypto space, like I mentioned, Wild West, anyone has with internet access, they can participate in this process. It removes barriers to entry, conventional finance issues. Say you're dealing with countries that have maybe high inflation for their currency, right? A deflationary currency is actually very attractive. If you have strong governmental restrictions, or if there's corruption in your country, right, where you have difficulty trusting the institutions, then you can look to DeFi to help solve some of these problems. Whoops. And being transparent in the space is very, very important. What's nice about just DeFi in general is that it is very transparent. You can typically see what's going on. You can audit the smart contracts yourself. You can walk through the code and see what's happening. You can see all the transactions out there public on the ledger. But also not just transparency on the blockchain in general, but transparency in how the companies actually ran, right? So, for example, when we did our relaunch for Useless, we actually went on stream and showed us going through step by step, launching the token in real time, locking the liquidity, airdropping the tokens during the relaunch. It was exciting. It was interesting. It was also pretty scary, right? But transparency is something that necessarily we don't have to do, but we feel is important that we do, because if you aren't transparent, then what are you, right? And we want to be able to show that we are, like, I'm fully doxxed, right? People can go and look up my name. There's a company registered, and I we we don't have really a lot of secrets. There's a lot of tokens out there. I'm again not going to say any names that really hype up things that don't quite exist, or they embellish or elaborate where they are in the process. And so from day one, we made it a goal and a purpose of ours to be extraordinarily transparent. We're going to have some secrets from time to time, but that's usually more like competitive edge things that we're really, or things that we may or may not do. But for the long and short of it is the biggest thing we're worried about protecting is just either our trademarks or our intellectual property or anything that's code wise that we don't want publicly shared. That's important that we don't let that get out there. How does Useless plan on surviving a crypto winter? So what's really cool about Useless is that we don't have to rely on almost like, you ever heard of the greater fool theory, right? It's that you're investing in something. I don't want to use the word investment, but you if typically just in generally speaking about an investment, if you were to invest in something, and the hope is that someone else comes along and invests in after you so that you can survive it, right? There's a greater fool that comes along, and it's almost like MLME or Ponzi scheme-ish, right? What's really cool about Useless is we don't need to worry about bringing in more people in perpetuity. Instead, what we can focus on is almost treat it like a startup, right? That our goal is to generate revenue. If we generate revenue, then it's going to the furnace. If we have stuff in our furnace, it's being injected into the token either as liquidity, which obviously it will need. But once we reach the healthy amount of liquidity, then it's all buyback and burn. And that helps the price action. So frankly, we don't need a ton of people in order for those who are holding the tokens to feel the benefit from it, which is really exciting. Another key innovation that we have is the useless swapper. So one thing that I will say, just the history of this, I think is important. This was innovated by our very own DeFi Mark. DeFi Mark is our chief blockchain officer, and he is an incredibly brilliant mind in the DeFi space. And so the useless swapper was actually innovated, believe it or not, as a tool to help our multi-signature wallet convert BNB into Binance Peg USDT, because we had an issue where we raised money for Probit, $25,000, and then BNB crashed and went down to like 21,000. So we had to like pony up the rest of the money. And I was like, man, it would be really nice if we could just take our BNB, send it to a contract, and have boom, Binance Peg USDT in our wallet without having to do a bunch of multi-sig transactions and swaps or anything like that. From that, Mark saw the potential and innovated this into something where you can buy tokens with. So you could buy useless, right? And so this is something that we are very excited about, an innovation in the space that we contributed to DeFi. We feel that's really important. And yes, we will take credit for it because we are the first swapper contract out there. And yeah, what it does is it helps eliminate a lot of the headaches of trying to send people over to PancakeSwap for them to go through and figure out exactly how to use PancakeSwap. Instead, you just say, look, get BNB, send it to this address, boom, you have useless, which is pretty cool. Final thoughts. I just want to say thank you for being part of this incredible journey with us. And thanks for being part of this presentation. DeFi is an interesting, fast-moving, scary place sometimes, right? Our goal in this whole process is to innovate, but also provide greater sense of security, right? And the fact that we're trying to be good examples in the space for people to look to us and say, you guys are doing something right, right? And we always have areas of improvement. We know that there's always areas where we could make things a little better, and we strive to do that. We're open to criticism. But I will say that here at Useless, that we have, I believe, a very bright future ahead of us. We have a lot of really cool things in the works. I would check out our Discord, check out our website, find out what we're about a little bit, and join our beta for our app. Check it out, give us some feedback, and be part of that community experience where you're helping to build the future of DeFi. Thanks for coming, and I hope you have a great rest of your day. Take care.